A monograph just means a book with a single author, monograph. And it's probably the easiest, most straightforward, and common citation you're ever going to need to know how to do. When it comes time to creating a citation for your monograph or your single-authored book, you actually have to create two different types of citation. They look very similar, but there are some key differences between them, and that's because they're used for different purposes. The first one, the one you're going to use most, is the footnote. Now, a footnote is used throughout your essay every single time you cite a particular page from that book. So you have to cite it in a way that indicates specific information. The other one is a bibliography. Now, a bibliography is only used once. It comes at the very end of your essay, and what it indicates is that the book as a whole is used in your essay. So because it's not indicating a specific page number, it's a much more general piece of information. Now, which do you do first? Well, my advice is that you do your footnotes first. The reason for that is simply because you do not want to include anything in your bibliography that you have not cited at least once as a footnote in your essay. And because you're not entirely sure what you will and will not cite until you get to your final draft of your essay, it's really best to leave the bibliography until the end. And because that's my advice to you, let's begin with the footnote. Now, in order to create a footnote, you need two types of information. The first is the bibliographic information, the writing about the book, and the second is the page number, the thing that you're actually specifically citing. Now, most of the bibliographic information can be found in one of three places. The most straightforward, and hopefully the only place you have to look, is the title page. So if we open up this book to its title page, we find the title, the author, the publisher, where it was published, and the year. And that's actually all of the bibliographic information we need. However, if you happen to get a book that isn't quite this complete, there are two other places you can look for the missing information. The first is the copyright page, which in most modern books is on the opposite side of the title page. Now, this is usually legally required in most countries, so you should be able to find it in any modern book. However, if you can't find it and you can't find the information you need there, you may have to go to the library catalog or to the sales page where you purchased the book in order to find some of that information. But because we're quite lucky and all the information we need is actually on the title page, that is where we're going to be looking for it today. So, how do we get started on our footnote? Well, the first bit of advice I can give you to make your life a lot simpler is that you should think of a footnote as a sentence, a single thought, a little bit of extra dialogue you have with your reader about the information you're providing. And because it's a sentence, you will use lots of commas rather than full stops or periods. It's just a general rule, but it really helps me understand what information I need to include and what punctuation marks I need to use. So we begin our footnote with the name of the author. And because it's a sentence, we write the author's name the way we would say it aloud if we were talking to somebody. So, Joseph J. Ellis. Now, we could have put Joseph John Ellis or Joseph James Ellis if we knew what his middle name was. We also could have abbreviated it as J.J. Ellis. And sometimes style guides do ask you to do that for consistency's sake across all your different entries. But generally speaking, in Chicago, you want to include the author's name exactly how it's written on the publication. Partly because it makes it easier to find that particular publication when the reader is looking for it, but secondly, it's kind of a sign of respect. That's how the author wants to be known. That's the name we should use. After we put in the author's name, we put in a comma. The next part is the title. Now, the title is not just written out, it's written out in italics. So we hit Control-I on most modern word processors, and that turns our text into italics, which is basically tilted 30 degrees. Now, why do we do this? Well, if you put something in italics, it's a little bit of code. It's a little bit of a hint about what type of publication it is. Anything, a book, a newspaper, a magazine, or an entire website that is a whole thing, that is a one object, is going to be in italics. If it's a chapter or an article or a newspaper article, something that's part of a larger whole, that's cited in a different way. So by putting it in italics, you're basically saying this is an object you could actually carry, virtually in the case of a website, but is an entire thing on its own. In some older books and in some things that are typewritten on a typewriter, you might see people use underline instead of italics. That's just because not all typewriters and not all printing presses used to be able to do things in italics. But because you're using a modern word processor, you should be using that. So we type out the title, Founding Brothers, the Revolutionary Generation. Now you'll notice a couple things about the way that I typed this out. First, I put a colon in between the title and the subtitle, even though there isn't a colon here on the page. Now, putting the colon there is a typographical convention. It's a bit of information, again, you're giving your reader, saying this is the title, and anything after the colon is the subtitle. It doesn't have to actually be there on the page for you to include it. The second thing you want to understand is that I have not capitalized the subtitle the same way that it is in the book. The book says the Revolutionary Generation, all in capital letters. I, however, have done it in title or headline capitalization. That's simply a standardization, a normalization of the text. How do you do title capitalization? Well, the basic rule is that you capitalize the first letter of every word except for articles, prepositions, and conjunctions. And if you don't remember your primary school grammar very well, those are the little words, words like the, of, on, inside, things like that. The only exception to that is that if that conjunction or that preposition or that article is at the beginning of the sentence of the title or the subtitle. So the would normally be in lowercase, but because it's the Revolutionary Generation, it is capitalized the same as the other words. If you're really unsure about this, just type in headline or title capitalization into Google and you can see some more examples there. Once we finished our title, we undo our italics, Control-I again, and we insert a different punctuation mark. Now, this time we want to indicate the publication information, where and when it was published. And rather than use commas to separate that, we use brackets or parentheses. Why do we do that? Well, we don't want to indicate that this is another title or another part of the title by using a comma. We have to use something different. And the way I sort of remember it is that publishers are often called publishing houses, and these little brackets are the walls of my house. So there's 3 bits of information that you need to put into your publication brackets. The first is the place of publication. Now, normally that is just the city that it's published in. The only time you would add a province or a state or a country is if it's not clear which city that actually is. So if you're talking about London, people will normally assume you mean London in the United Kingdom. Same with Paris in France or New York in the United States. However, if you do something like London, Ontario, that's not the London people normally think of, so you will need to add ONT to indicate Ontario. The most common one you're probably going to come across in academia, however, is Cambridge. Cambridge in the United Kingdom is styled Cambridge because it was the first one, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, for the Harvard University Press, is usually done as Cambridge, Mass. Now you'll notice that Mass and Ont aren't the normal postal abbreviations for those provinces. And that's because we are using publisher abbreviations rather than postal abbreviations, which have changed over time. It's a little bit of a lookup exercise. You will usually have to go online and search what these different abbreviations are, but once you've done this enough times, you'll sort of learn them and you won't have to look them up as often. Fortunately, in this case, New York is New York and we can leave it as it is. The next typographical mark we use is a colon. Everything before the colon is the city, everything after it is the name of the publisher. So we have Alfred A. Knopf. Now, why do we use a colon? Well, because sometimes you'll often have commas inside either the city or the name of the publisher. The colon is less common and it makes it clear which bit of information is which. Also, if you have New York publishers or Cambridge publishers, it's not necessarily clear if Cambridge is the city or the publisher, so having that clear typographical mark makes that indication. After the publisher, you put a comma, and the comma separates the publisher from the year, in this case 2001. Now, a lot of times you will actually get no date for the publication on the title page, and you'll have to go to the copyright page to see that. Now, this one only has a single copyright date of 2000, but sometimes you'll have lots of different copyright dates, and you always want to use the most recent one, because obviously the most recent one is the date that is going to be the closest to the present day, the most likely one to have been used, unless, for example, you have a book that has somehow managed to time travel. Now, you'll notice that 2000 here is different than 2001. And again, whether it's on the title page or the copyright page, you always want to use the most recent date in your publication information. If there is no date and you cannot find it on the book, on the copyright page, or in the library catalog where you have obtained your book, you can put in D, which means no date or date not known. But that should really be a last resort. Always do look in those three places and try to find the date of your object. So once we finish the publication information, we have all the bibliographic or book information we need for our citation. The last thing we have to do is really just type in the page number. And that page number could be anything, any bit of information we used. And in this case, we'll say page 68. Now, 68 gives us a single page, we put a full stop, and our sentence is complete. We have a whole footnote. If you're using multiple page numbers, however, there's two different ways to do it. If the page numbers are not next to each other, so page 68 and page 72, you separate them with a comma, 68, 72. If, however, it's that entire section, page 68 through 72, you need to include an in-dash. Now, an in-dash is not a hyphen. It's not that little minus symbol at the top of your keyboard. It's EN-dash, and it's a slightly longer mark, and it's used for any kind of range. So a page range or a date range, anytime you're doing two numbers together, you should use this typographical mark. Now, how do you insert it? Well, you can use the insert symbol function on Word, or if you have a full-size keyboard like I do, you can hold down the left Alt key, and then using the number pad on your right, type in 0150, all the time holding down that Alt key. When you release the Alt key, you get your in-dash, and you can see it's just a little bit bigger than a normal hyphen. And again, that's a typographical convention. It just makes it a bit easier to understand. That is a range of dates, a range of pages, rather than 68 minus 72. Now, if that seems obvious to you and that you don't really need to do it, most people in the English-speaking world will not call you up on it. But think about this. You're always trying to make things crystal clear to your reader. You're trying to be nice and kind and empathetic to your reader. So why not go that extra 2 seconds and make it just that little bit clearer? Now that we have our footnote, it's time to create our bibliography entry. Now, as I said before, the bibliography has a different function than the footnote. It's only used once, and it exists in a long list of all the books and articles and websites that you've used in your essay. Now that list is alphabetized by the last name of the author. And because it's alphabetized by the author's last name, you want to put the author's last name first. Ellis, Joseph J. Now, J has a full stop attached to it anyways because it's an abbreviation. But even if it had been just Ellis Joseph, you would still put a full stop after the name of the author. Why do we do that? Well, if a footnote is a sentence, a bibliography entry is a paragraph. A paragraph specifically with 3 sentences. The first sentence is the author, the second is the title, and the third is the publication information. So, our second sentence is our title, and that's exactly the same as in our footnote. Putting it into italics, Founding Brothers, the Revolutionary Generation. And then end your italics and put that full stop to end it. The last thing you want to do is the publication information. Now, because these are 3 separate sentences, you do not need to include those brackets. It's just its own sentence, but it is styled in the same way. New York, Alfred A. Knopf, 2001. Now, you'll notice that there is this little bit of space underneath the first line for the second line of your entry. This is called a hanging indent, and you can do this in Word, and if you would like more information about it, please see my video on formatting, which will be coming out shortly. But the reason that we use the hanging indent is so that Ellis, which is the last name, is really clear and really easy to see down that long list of different author names. But for now, you have all the information you need. Joseph J. Ellis, Founding Brothers, published in New York in 2001, a full footnote entry, and a complete bibliography entry.